My parents threw a dinner to celebrate my brother's new business. It was my idea. Same name, same logo. Dad handed him $150,000. Everyone clapped. I clapped too. The next morning I filed something. Nobody's clapped since. My name's Noah. I'm 32. And if you told me a year ago that I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday filing paperwork against my own family, I would have laughed in your face. I probably would have offered you a coffee and told you to lay off the true crime podcasts. But life has this funny way of proving you wrong at the worst possible times, and here I am. So grab a snack, get comfortable, and let me tell you how my parents handed my entire dream to my brother on a silver platter and then threw him a party for it. Let me back up a little. I grew up in Ridgeway, Tennessee, one of those towns where everybody knows everybody's business, and the biggest event of the year is the county fair barbecue competition. My parents, Hank and Jolene, had 2 boys. My older brother, Sullivan, who we all called Sully, and me. Growing up, Sully was the golden child. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it the way you describe the weather. It just was. Sully was 3 years older than me, played quarterback in high school, got the homecoming king crown, dated the prettiest girl in our graduating class, the whole small-town hero package. And honestly, I didn't mind. I wasn't jealous of Sully because I had my own thing going on. I was the quiet one. The kid in the garage taking apart lawnmowers and putting them back together. The one who spent Friday nights sketching business plans in a spiral notebook while everyone else was at bonfires. By the time I was 23, I'd figured out what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to start a landscaping and outdoor design company. Not just mowing lawns, but full-service property transformation. Custom patios, fire pits, water features, outdoor kitchens, the works. I'd been studying horticulture, taking business courses at the community college, and working for a local contractor named Emmett who taught me everything about hardscaping. I was serious about this. I had binders full of plans, cost projections, branding ideas, even a name I'd been sitting with for over a year. Greenstone Outdoor Design. I love that name. I designed the logo myself, a clean greenstone shape with 2 leaves curving off the top, modern but natural. I put that logo on everything. Business cards I printed at the library, a mock website I built using a free template, even a hat I had custom embroidered at a shop in Nashville. Here's the thing about my family, though. Whenever I brought up Greenstone, my dad would kind of nod and change the subject. My mom would smile and say something like, "That's nice, honey, but have you thought about something more stable?" Sully would straight up ignore it. Not in a mean way, just in the way you ignore a kid talking about wanting to be an astronaut. Like it was cute, but not real. And for a while, I let that roll off me. I figured I'd just prove them all wrong when the time came. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I was some misunderstood genius. I had plenty of my own flaws. I was stubborn, I was bad at asking for help, and I had a habit of disappearing into my work and forgetting to be a normal human being for days at a time. But the one thing I had going for me was that when I decided I was going to do something, I did it. No shortcuts, no half measures. I spent the next several years grinding. I got my contractor's license at 25. I took out a small personal loan to buy equipment, a truck, a trailer, basic tools. I started doing side jobs on weekends, building patios for neighbors, designing garden layouts for people at church. Every single project I completed, I documented. Photos, client testimonials, cost breakdowns. I was building a portfolio and a reputation before I even officially launched. Emmett told me I was one of the most disciplined young guys he'd ever worked with, and coming from a man who'd been in the industry for 30 years, that meant the world to me. When I was 28, I finally felt ready. I had enough savings for a real launch. I'd registered the name Greenstone Outdoor Design with the state, set up the LLC, got the EIN, opened a business bank account, built a professional website, the whole 9 yards. I even had 3 clients lined up before I officially opened. I was so proud of myself that I decided to tell my family at Sunday dinner, which was a tradition at my parents' house. Every Sunday, rain or shine, the whole family sat down at that big oak table in my mom's dining room and ate together. So I showed up that Sunday with a folder. I had printouts of the website, the logo, the business plan summary, projected revenue for the first 2 years. I waited until dessert because I wanted everyone relaxed and in a good mood. Then I cleared my throat and said, "Hey, I've got some news. I'm officially launching my business. Greenstone Outdoor Design." I slid the folder across the table toward my dad. My mom picked it up first. She flipped through it, smiled politely, and said, "Oh, this looks very professional, Noah." My dad glanced at it for about 4 seconds, nodded, and said, "Well, good luck with that, son." Then he turned to Sully and asked him about his fantasy football draft. That was it. That was the entire reaction. No questions about how it worked, no excitement, no congratulations, nothing. Sully didn't even look at the folder. He just kept eating his pecan pie and talking about wide receivers. My uncle Cordell, who was visiting that week, actually leaned over and flipped through a few pages. He said, "This looks sharp, Noah. Real professional." My dad gave Cordell this look like he'd just complimented the neighbor's lawn, and the conversation moved on. I drove home that night feeling like I'd swallowed a rock. My girlfriend at the time, Waverly, was waiting on the couch when I got back. She took one look at my face and said, "They didn't care, did they?" I shook my head. She pulled me into a hug and told me something I've never forgotten. She said, "Noah, you don't need their applause. You need your own." And she was right. So I poured myself into the business. For the next 3 years, Greenstone grew slowly but steadily. I did good work, word spread, and by the time I turned 31, I had a small crew of 3 guys working with me, a solid client list, and revenue that was finally making the business feel real. I wasn't getting rich, but I was building something. I was proud of it every single day. Then came the dinner. My mom called me on a Wednesday evening and said she was hosting a special family dinner that Saturday. She sounded excited, which was unusual for her because Jolene doesn't get excited about much besides church fundraisers and Hallmark movies. She said it was to celebrate Sully's new business venture and that Dad had been helping him get it off the ground. She said it was going to be a big night and that I should be there to support my brother. I said, "Sure, Mom, I'll be there." I didn't think much of it. Sully had bounced around jobs for years. He'd sold cars, managed a gym for about 6 months, tried real estate, and briefly got into flipping furniture on social media before giving that up too. Whatever his new thing was, I figured it'd last about as long as the others. I was happy to show up, eat some food, and clap for my brother. I had no idea what I was walking into. That Saturday, I pulled up to my parents' house and immediately noticed something was different. There were cars everywhere. Not just family cars. I'm talking about my parents' neighbors, my dad's buddies from the Elks Lodge, my mom's church friends, even my Uncle Cordell and Aunt Bethany, who lived 2 hours away in Knoxville. This wasn't a family dinner. This was an event. I walked in through the side door like I always did, and the house was packed. My mom had set up a buffet in the kitchen. There were balloons in the living room, and someone had hung a banner over the fireplace. I stopped dead in my tracks when I read it. It said, in big green letters, "Congratulations, Sully, Greenstone Outdoor Designs." Designs, with an S. But the logo underneath it, the logo on that banner, was my logo. The stone with the 2 leaves. My design. My work. Staring back at me from a banner celebrating my brother. I stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably about 15 seconds. My chest got tight. My ears started ringing. I felt like I was watching the whole scene from outside my own body, like I'd accidentally walked into the wrong dimension where everything looked familiar, but nothing made sense. Sully came around the corner wearing a polo shirt with the logo embroidered on the chest. My logo, on his chest. He saw me and grinned like nothing was wrong and said, "Hey little brother, glad you could make it. Come check this out." He grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the dining room where my dad was standing next to an easel with a presentation board on it. The board had photos of landscaping projects on it. Some of them were stock photos. Some of them, and I am not exaggerating, were photos from my own website. My dad tapped a fork against his glass, and the room got quiet. He cleared his throat and gave a little speech. He said that Sully had come to him a few months ago with a brilliant business idea, an outdoor design and landscaping company. He said Sully had done his research, put together a business plan, and showed real entrepreneurial spirit. Then my dad said that he and my mom had decided to invest in Sully's future, and he handed Sully a check, $150,000. The room erupted. People were clapping, cheering, patting Sully on the back. My Aunt Bethany had tears in her eyes. My mom was beaming like she'd just watched her son win the Nobel Prize. $150,000. I want you to sit with that number for a second. $150,000. For a business that had my name on it. My logo. My concept. My years of work repackaged and handed to my brother with a check that was worth more than everything I'd earned in 3 years of backbreaking labor combined. I stood in the corner of that dining room holding a plate of food I couldn't eat and watched my family celebrate my brother for stealing my life's work. And the worst part, the part that still makes my stomach turn when I think about it, is that nobody in that room thought anything was wrong. Not one person looked at me and said, "Wait, doesn't Noah already do this?" Not one. Waverly wasn't with me that night. She'd had a work thing and couldn't make it. I've thanked the universe for that 100 times because I don't know what she would have done, and honestly, it might have involved flipping a table. After my dad's speech, I pulled Sully aside in the hallway. I kept my voice low because I didn't want to make a scene. I said, "Sully, what is this?" He looked at me like I'd asked him what color the sky was. He said, "What do you mean? It's my business." I said, "It's called Greenstone. That's my company's name. That's my logo." He laughed. Actually laughed. He said, "Come on, Noah, it's not that serious. Names are just names. Besides, yours is Greenstone Outdoor Design. Mine is Greenstone Outdoor Designs. Plural. Totally different." I felt my hands shaking. I said, "Sully, you used my logo. You used photos from my website. You took everything I built and put your name on it." He put his hand on my shoulder like he was comforting a child and said, "Look, I'm not trying to compete with you. You do your little thing and I'll do mine. There's room for both of us." Then he walked away and went back to accepting congratulations. I found my dad in the kitchen refilling his drink. I said, "Dad, do you realize what just happened?" He looked at me and said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "That's my business. Greenstone is my company. I showed you the plans years ago." He waved his hand dismissively and said, "Noah, your brother has a real shot at making something of himself here. Don't be petty about a name. You should be happy for him. Don't be petty about a name. 3 years of building a business from nothing. A name I registered with the state. A brand I poured my soul into. And my father called me petty." I went to find my mom. She was in the living room showing the presentation board to her friend Rosalind. I pulled her aside and said, "Mom, you know I already have a company called Greenstone, right?" She blinked at me and said, "Well, yes, honey, but Sully's is different. He's going to do the big commercial projects. You just do the small residential stuff. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing." The logo was literally identical. The name was 1 letter off. And my mother stood there and told me it wasn't the same thing. I left. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I walked out through the side door, got in my truck, and sat in the driveway for a long time. I watched through the window as my family laughed and celebrated inside. I could see the banner. I could see the balloons. I could see my dad shaking Sully's hand and pulling him into a hug, the kind of hug he'd never once given me over anything I'd accomplished. I drove home on autopilot. When I got there, I sat on the edge of the bed and called Waverly. She answered on the second ring and immediately knew something was wrong. I told her everything. Every detail. The banner, the logo, the check, Sully's smug face, my dad's dismissal, my mom's rationalization. There was a long silence on her end. Then she said, very calmly, "Noah, this is not okay. And I need you to hear me when I say that you are not going to let this stand." I told her I didn't know what to do. She said, "You know exactly what to do. You're just scared to do it because it means going against your family." And she was right. She was always right about the things that mattered. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about every Sunday dinner where I talked about Greenstone and been ignored. Every time my dad changed the subject. Every time my mom smiled politely and moved on. They hadn't been ignoring me. They'd been listening. They'd been taking notes. And then they'd given everything, the concept, the brand, the financial backing I never got, to the son they actually believed in, the one they thought deserved it. I lay there in the dark staring at the ceiling, and something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger exactly. It was clarity. The kind of clarity you get when you finally stop making excuses for people who don't deserve them. I realized that I had spent my entire life trying to earn something from my parents that they were never going to give me. Their respect, their belief, their investment, not in a business, in me. And now they'd taken the one thing I'd built entirely on my own and given it to someone else. And they expected me to smile about it. I didn't smile. I got up at 5 in the morning, made a pot of coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and started making a list. The weeks after that dinner were some of the hardest of my life, and not just emotionally. Sully moved fast. Within 2 weeks, he had a website up. A real one, Not the free template kind I'd started with, but a professionally designed site with slick animations and drone footage of properties that I'm pretty sure he pulled from stock video sites. He had business cards printed, a wrapped truck, and a social media presence that looked like it was run by an actual marketing team. $150,000 goes a long way when you've never had to earn anything yourself. The problem was that Ridgeway isn't a big place. When two companies show up with nearly identical names and logos in the same small market, people get confused. I started getting calls from potential clients asking if I was affiliated with Greenstone Outdoor Designs. Some people thought we were the same company. Others assumed Sully's version was the upgraded, more professional one because his marketing looked better. I lost 3 leads in 1 month because of the confusion. 3 families who'd been ready to sign contracts with me went with Sully instead because they thought his operation was bigger and more established. That hurt more than the dinner. The dinner was personal. This was professional. This was my livelihood being chipped away by someone who'd copied my homework and gotten a gold star for it. I talked to Emmett about it. We were sitting in his shop on a Tuesday afternoon, and I laid the whole thing out for him. He listened without interrupting, which was his way, and when I finished he shook his head slowly and said, "Noah, I've been doing this for 30 years and I've seen a lot of shady things, but this is a new one. Your own blood." He paused and then said, "But here's what I know. Your brother doesn't know the first thing about this work. He doesn't know soil composition. He doesn't know drainage grading. He doesn't know how to read a property survey or calculate load-bearing capacity for a retaining wall. Money can buy a truck and a logo, but it can't buy skill. Give it time." Emmett was right, but time felt like a luxury I didn't have. My crew was worried. My lead guy, Deacon, pulled me aside one morning and said, "Boss, I've got a kid on the way. I need to know this is going to be okay." That conversation kept me up for 2 nights straight. I wasn't just responsible for myself anymore. I had people counting on me. I'll be honest. There was a stretch in there, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, where I seriously considered just rebranding. Changing the name, starting over, letting Sully have Greenstone. Waverly talked me out of it. She sat me down one evening and said, "Noah, you built Greenstone. It's yours. It was yours before your brother ever heard the word landscaping, and it will be yours long after he moves on to whatever shiny thing catches his eye next. Do not give up what you built because someone else decided to take a shortcut." She was right. Again, Waverly had this ability to see the long game when I was drowning in the short one. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to rebrand, and I wasn't going to compete on marketing dollars, because that was a fight I couldn't win. Instead, I was going to compete on the one thing Sully couldn't fake: quality. I doubled down on my work. I took on every project I could find, gave every single client more than they paid for, and made sure every finished job was documented with professional photos. I hired a friend of Waverly's named Tully who did freelance photography, and she came out to shoot my completed projects for cost. Those photos went on my website, my social media, and into a portfolio binder I started bringing to every consultation. I also started networking harder than I ever had. I joined the local Chamber of Commerce, showed up to every community event, sponsored a Little League team, and volunteered to do a free patio build for a family whose house had been damaged in a storm. That one got picked up by the local paper, and suddenly Greenstone Outdoor Design, the real one, was getting attention for the right reasons. Slowly, things started to turn. Clients who'd gone with Sully started calling me, not to hire me at first, but to ask for help. Turns out Sully's operation was all surface and no substance. His first big project, a backyard redesign for a family called the Prescotts, was a disaster. He'd poured a concrete patio without proper grading, and the first heavy rain turned their backyard into a swimming pool. The drainage was so bad that water was flowing toward their foundation instead of away from it. The Prescotts were furious. They left reviews online that were absolutely brutal, and word spread fast in a town like Ridgeway. Sully's second project wasn't much better. He'd subcontracted the work to a crew he found on the cheap, and they installed a retaining wall that started leaning within 6 weeks. The homeowner, a guy named Boyd, threatened to sue. Sully panicked and tried to fix it himself, which only made it worse. He ended up having to pay Boyd out of pocket to hire someone else to redo the whole thing. That someone else was me. Boyd called me, explained the situation, and I went out there and rebuilt that wall from scratch. Did it right. Boyd became one of my best referral sources. By month 4, the tide had completely turned. Sully's company was hemorrhaging money and reputation. My company was growing. I picked up 2 commercial contracts, one for a restaurant patio and one for an office park courtyard, that were bigger than anything I'd done before. Deacon and I hired 2 more guys. I finally had enough revenue to lease a proper workshop space instead of working out of my garage. During this time, I also did something I should have done years ago. I went to see a therapist, a woman named Dr. Harlan, who had an office above a bakery downtown, which meant the waiting room always smelled like cinnamon rolls, which honestly made the whole experience about 40% more pleasant. Dr. Harlan helped me work through a lot of the family stuff. Not just the Greenstone situation, but the deeper patterns. The favoritism, the feeling of being invisible, the way I'd spent my whole life performing for an audience that wasn't watching. She helped me understand that my parents' behavior wasn't a reflection of my value. It was a reflection of their own limitations. That was a big shift for me. I stopped being angry at my parents for not seeing me, and I started feeling sorry for them, because they had a son who'd built something real, something lasting, and they'd chosen to invest in the one who hadn't. That wasn't my failure. That was theirs. Waverly and I got engaged around this time. Nothing flashy. I proposed on the back porch of our little rental house on a Thursday evening with a ring I'd been saving for since I was 29. She cried. I cried. Deacon and his wife came over with champagne, and we sat outside until midnight talking about the future. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely happy. Not happy because I was winning some competition with my brother. Happy because my life, the one I'd built with my own hands, was good. It was really, really good. And then Sully's business officially started to collapse, and that's when things got interesting. Because it turns out that when you give $150,000 to someone who doesn't know what they're doing, the money doesn't just disappear quietly. It disappears loudly, publicly, and with legal consequences. Let me rewind to the morning after the dinner party. I mentioned I sat down with a pot of coffee and made a list. That list had 3 items on it. 1. Document everything. 2. Protect my business legally. 3. Be patient. I stuck to that list like a religious text, and it ended up being the smartest thing I've ever done. The Monday after the party, I called a lawyer. Not a big fancy firm, just a local attorney named Sloan Whitfield who specialized in small business and intellectual property. I'd found her through the Chamber of Commerce directory. She had an office the size of a walk-in closet and a handshake that could crack a walnut. I liked her immediately. I sat down in Sloan's office and told her the whole story. She listened, took notes, asked a few sharp questions, and then said something that made my stomach drop. She said, "Noah, did you trademark the name and the logo?" I said I'd registered the LLC and the business name with the state. She shook her head and said, "That's not the same thing. A state registration doesn't give you trademark protection. But here's the good news. You've been using this name and this logo in commerce for over 3 years. Under common law, you have established prior use. Your brother just started using it. That gives us a foundation." Sloan explained that even without a federal trademark, the fact that I'd been operating under the Greenstone name for years, with a documented history of clients, marketing materials, and public use, gave me significant legal standing. She filed a federal trademark application for Greenstone Outdoor Design that same week. She also sent a cease and desist letter to Sully's company, demanding that he stop using the Greenstone name and the logo immediately. Sully's response to the cease and desist was about what you'd expect. He called me, laughing, and said, "Are you serious right now, Noah? You're suing your own brother over a name." I told him I wasn't suing anyone yet. I was asking him to stop using my brand. He said, "Dad's not going to be happy about this." And then he hung up. My dad called me an hour later. He was furious. He said I was being vindictive and jealous, that I was trying to sabotage my brother's success because I couldn't handle someone else doing well. I let him talk. When he was done, I said, "Dad, he stole my business name and my logo. This isn't about jealousy. This is about what's right." He said, "You need to drop this, Noah. Family doesn't sue family." I said, "Family doesn't steal from family either." He hung up on me. My mom sent me a long text message that night. It was the kind of message that's dressed up as concern but is really a guilt trip. She said she was worried about me, that I seemed consumed by resentment, and that she hoped I'd find it in my heart to support my brother instead of tearing him down. I didn't respond. I showed it to Dr. Harlan at my next session, and she said, "That's a classic deflection. They're reframing your legitimate grievance as a character flaw. It was validating to hear a professional confirm what I already felt. Meanwhile, Sloan was building the case. She had me gather everything. Every piece of evidence of my prior use of the Greenstone name. Business registration documents from 3 years ago. The original logo design files with timestamps. Client contracts. Invoices. Social media posts. Website archives from the Wayback Machine. Photos of my business cards, my truck decal, the embroidered hat I'd had made in Nashville. Receipts from the embroidery shop with the date on them. Even a screenshot of a text I'd sent my mom 2 years ago that included the logo. The evidence was overwhelming. There was no ambiguity. I had been Greenstone first, publicly, commercially, and provably. While the legal process moved forward, something else happened that blew the whole thing wide open. Remember the Prescotts, the family whose backyard Sully flooded with his garbage patio job? Well, the Prescotts didn't just leave bad reviews. They filed a complaint with the state contractor licensing board. Turns out Sully had been operating without a proper contractor's license. He had a general business license, but not the specific contractor's license required for the type of work he was doing. In Tennessee, performing contracting work without the proper licensure is a serious violation. Fines, potential criminal charges, the works. I didn't find this out from Sully. I found it out from Sloan, who'd been monitoring public records as part of her due diligence. She called me one afternoon and said, "Noah, your brother has a much bigger problem than a trademark dispute." I asked what she meant, and she said, "He's operating unlicensed. He's got a formal complaint filed against him. And based on what I'm seeing, he's also potentially in violation of consumer protection laws for misrepresenting his qualifications to clients." She paused and said, "This is going to get ugly for him. I'll admit something here. My first reaction wasn't satisfaction. It was sadness. Despite everything, Sully was my brother. I'd looked up to him when we were kids. I remembered him teaching me how to ride a bike, how to throw a spiral, how to talk to girls, though his advice on that last one was terrible. Part of me wanted to call him and warn him. To say, "Hey, you need to get your house in order before this blows up." But then I remembered the dinner. The banner. The logo on his polo shirt. My dad's check for $150,000. My mom telling me it wasn't the same thing. And I realized that warning Sully would just be another version of what I'd always done. Protecting someone who wouldn't protect me. Sacrificing my own interests to keep the peace in a family that only valued peace when it benefited them. So I didn't call him. I let the process work. Over the next 2 months, 3 things happened simultaneously. First, my trademark application was progressing. Sloan said we had an extremely strong case and expected approval. Second, Sully's licensing complaint was being investigated by the state board, and he'd been formally notified. And third, Sully's business was actively failing. He'd burned through most of the $150,000 on the fancy website, the wrapped truck, marketing campaigns, and a workshop lease he couldn't afford. The bad reviews and the licensing issues meant new clients had dried up completely. He was sinking. My dad, to his credit or maybe his stubbornness, tried to bail Sully out again. He offered to give him another $50,000. But this time my mom pushed back. I heard this secondhand from my Aunt Bethany, who'd started reaching out to me after she heard the full story. Apparently, my mom had told my dad that they couldn't keep funding something that wasn't working and that maybe they should talk to Noah about it. My dad reportedly said he didn't need advice from the son who was trying to destroy the family. That line stung when Bethany told me, but not as much as it would have 6 months earlier. Dr. Harlan had given me good armor. Waverly and I set a wedding date during all of this. We picked a Saturday in October, small ceremony, just close friends and a few family members who'd actually shown up for us. Deacon was going to be my best man. Tully was doing the photography. It was going to be simple and perfect, which is all we wanted. And then, on a random Tuesday morning, Sloan called me and said 4 words that changed everything. She said, "The trademark's approved. Greenstone Outdoor Design was officially, federally, legally mine." And with that approval came the legal authority to enforce it. Sloan sent a second letter to Sully's company. This one wasn't a cease and desist. It was a formal notice of trademark infringement with a deadline. Stop using the name and the logo within 30 days, or face legal action including damages for every dollar of revenue he'd earned while infringing. And given that his revenue had been funded by $150,000 of my parents' money, the potential damages were significant. The clock started ticking, and for the first time in this whole mess, I wasn't the one sweating. The 30 days came and went. Sully didn't comply. He didn't change the name, didn't remove the logo, didn't respond to Sloane's letter at all. I think he genuinely believed that because we were family, I wouldn't actually follow through. That I'd back down the way I always had. That Noah would be a good sport, take the hit, and keep the peace. He was wrong. Sloane filed the trademark infringement lawsuit on a Monday morning. I drove to the courthouse with her, signed the paperwork, and walked out into the parking lot feeling like I'd just stepped off a roller coaster. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From release. From the weight of finally standing up for something instead of swallowing it down. The lawsuit named Sullivan as the defendant and sought damages for willful trademark infringement, including the revenue generated under the Greenstone name and the associated profits. Sloane had also included a claim for unfair competition, since Sully had used photos from my actual website to market his services, which constituted false advertising and consumer confusion. The total damages we were seeking were significant enough that when Sully finally got served, he called me for the first time in months. And this time, he wasn't laughing. He said, "Noah, what the heck is this?" I said, "It's a lawsuit, Sully. I told you to change the name." He said, "You can't be serious. Dad is going to lose his mind." I said, "This isn't about Dad. This is about you taking something that was mine and refusing to give it back." There was a pause, and then he said something that almost made me feel sorry for him. He said, "I don't have the money to fight this." I said, "Then don't fight it. Just change the name." But Sully, being Sully, didn't take the easy way out. He went to my dad, and my dad, being my dad, hired a lawyer to represent Sully. A guy named Riggins from Nashville who charged $300 an hour and wore suits that cost more than my first truck. My dad was doubling down. He was going to fund Sully's legal defense the same way he'd funded Sully's business, with money and misplaced confidence. The discovery phase was brutal for Sully's side. Sloane was methodical. She subpoenaed everything: business records, financial statements, communications, marketing materials, the works. What came out was devastating. Sully's own emails showed that he'd pulled the Greenstone name directly from my website. There was a message to a graphic designer where Sully had literally attached my logo and said, "Make it look like this, but just tweak it a little." The designer had written back asking if the original was his, and Sully had responded, "Yeah, it's a family thing. Don't worry about it." A family thing. That's what he called stealing 3 years of my work. A family thing. Riggins, the expensive lawyer, took one look at the discovery evidence and reportedly told my dad that the case was unwinnable, that the evidence of prior use was rock solid, that the email to the graphic designer was essentially an admission, and that continuing to fight would only increase the damages. My dad apparently argued for a while, but even Riggins wouldn't sugarcoat it. He recommended they settle. Sully's side came to the table in December. The settlement negotiations took about 2 weeks. Here's what we landed on. Sully was required to immediately cease all use of the Greenstone name and logo. He had to take down his website, remove the truck wrap, destroy all printed materials, and issue a public correction on his social media accounts clarifying that his company was not affiliated with Greenstone Outdoor Design. He also had to pay me $45,000 in damages, which Sloane calculated based on the revenue I'd lost due to customer confusion during the months we'd been operating simultaneously. That $45,000 came out of what was left of my dad's original investment, which by that point wasn't much. The licensing board also came down on Sully around the same time. He was fined $12,000 for operating without proper licensure and was barred from applying for a contractor's license for 2 years. The Prescott's complaint had triggered an investigation that uncovered 2 additional clients who'd filed grievances. Sully's brief career in landscaping was over before it ever really started. The fallout with my family was exactly what you'd expect. My dad didn't speak to me for 3 months. My mom sent me one text that said, "I hope you're happy, Noah." I didn't respond to that one either. Sunday dinners stopped being a thing for me, which honestly was a relief. Those dinners had been more obligation than joy for years. But here's the part that surprised me. About 4 months after the settlement, my Aunt Bethany called and said my dad was struggling. Not financially, but emotionally. The whole situation had forced him to confront something he'd been avoiding for a long time, which was that he'd bet on the wrong son. Not because Sully was a bad person, but because Sully had never been held accountable for anything in his life, and my dad's constant rescuing was the reason why. Bethany said my mom had started going to a family therapist and that my dad had gone to one session, which for Hank was roughly the equivalent of climbing Everest in flip-flops. I didn't rush to reconcile. Dr. Harlan and I had talked about this possibility, and she'd helped me set boundaries for what reconciliation would need to look like. It couldn't be me apologizing for standing up for myself. It couldn't be a rug sweep. It had to be real. It took almost 6 months, but eventually my mom reached out. Not with a guilt trip this time, with an actual apology. She called me one evening and said, "Noah, I owe you an apology, and I don't want to do it over text. Can I come see you?" She drove over and sat at my kitchen table and told me she was sorry. She said she'd spent years not seeing what was right in front of her. She said she was proud of me and that she should have said it a long time ago. She cried. I cried. Waverly made her a cup of tea and we sat together for about an hour. My dad's apology came later, and it was less graceful because Hank isn't a graceful man. He showed up at my workshop one Saturday morning, stood in the doorway for about 10 seconds without saying anything, and then said, "I messed up, son." That was it. 3 words. But from my father, those 3 words were a novel. I nodded and said, "Yeah, you did." And then I asked him if he wanted to see what I was working on. He spent an hour walking around the shop, while Deacon showed him the patio project we were building for a client in Franklin. My dad asked questions. Real questions. For the first time in my life, he was actually interested. Sully and I are a work in progress. He never directly apologized, which I've accepted might never happen. He did eventually get a job managing a hardware store in town, which suits him better than anything he's done before. We're cordial at holidays. We're not close. I'm okay with that. Some relationships change shape, and trying to force them back doesn't help anyone. As for me, Greenstone Outdoor Design just celebrated its 6th year. We're up to 8 full-time employees. We've expanded into commercial projects across 3 counties. And last year, we were named the top outdoor design firm in the region by a local business magazine. Waverly and I got married that October, just like we planned. Small ceremony, big love. Deacon gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry at the same time. Tully took photos that belong in a gallery. It was the best day of my life. I still have that spiral notebook from when I was 23. The one where I first sketched the Greenstone logo. I keep it in my desk at the workshop. Sometimes when I'm having a rough day, I open it up and look at those early drawings, the ones I made when I was just a kid with a dream and a pencil. And I think about the guy who sat in his parents' dining room and got ignored. And I think about the guy who's sitting here now, running a real company with his name on it. Same guy, different chapter. Nobody handed me a check. Nobody threw me a party. Nobody clapped. But I built it anyway. And if you're out there right now, working on something that nobody in your life takes seriously, let me tell you what Waverly told me all those years ago. You don't need their applause. You need your own. So keep building. Keep going. The right people will see it eventually. And if they don't, build it anyway. Because the best revenge isn't loud. It's just being undeniably, unmistakably good at what you do. And if you happen to have a federal trademark to back it up, well, that doesn't hurt either.